So normally when I make these videos, I typically recommend power fantasy to just reincarnated into another world type stories, or just isekai, stuff like that. That's normally what I usually recommend when it comes to like webtoons. But not this time. This time I'm going to be recommending a series that is relatively different than some of the stuff I normally have recommended in the past, and I think that many of you might find it relatively interesting, because I sat down, I read the first 4 chapters, realized I caught up, there was more chapters, but I had to, pay coins to read ahead, and I paid coins to read ahead because I couldn't stop myself, because I was actually getting into reading it, and I'm fully caught up at this point. Now, what I want to talk about is what it's about and how you might find it relatively interesting. So, Soulwinder, what is it about, and is it something that might catch your attention? Well, it is, from what I could see so far, a murder mystery with a little bit more of a plot, like for instance, like say steampunk orientated world theme that might interest you. So let me go deeper into the overall context of what the story is about. So basically, the whole premise, or the world of Soulwinder, is about this great contraption, this giant gear, this giant machine that somehow is powering the entirety of the city and potentially most of the entire world, at least from what you can gather from the early chapters. And because of that, obviously someone needs to maintain said contraption. If that said contraption was to malfunction, fall apart, or not work anymore, obviously the world's powered energy and what they use to function, have daily lives, would cease that point onward. So you can understand the overall gravity of the situation when the first chapter opens up, that this great contraption is malfunctioning. It is having problems, and it is not operating at full capacity, and something is causing quakes or earthquakes because it is not working right. And our main female character, the clockworker, is not able to figure out what is actually going on with the great contraption. She is trying desperately to figure it out. She is trying to figure out where it's malfunctioning, etc., scanning all over the tower where breakpoints could be, but she finds absolutely nothing. Thus leads into some other elements within the story. You have our main male character, Nathan, that was introduced in chapter 1 as well. He somehow appears in the tower to, help out our main female character, the clockworker, and he tries his best to help her, but he only makes things a lot worse by causing another quake. But also on top of that, he actually, spoiler alert, if you have not caught up yet and you want to read it, I recommend you to read it, but if you haven't caught up and you don't want to be spoiled, stop right here. But he dies in chapter 3. And basically, with his death in chapter 3, he causes a lot more problems, because this affects the overall mental state of, our main female character, the clockworker, and how she might not be able to be a clockworker any longer. And thus leads into the overall murder mystery of the story, of figuring out why did Nathan have to die, what is a Soulwinder, and what is going on in this world with the great contraption, and, who is really trying to mess with our main female character, the clockworker, and stop her from doing her actual duties. There's a lot of questions that pop up as the chapters carry on, and I feel like, if you were to sit down and read the first 3 to 4 chapters, you get a good presentation to know if you want to continue reading or not from the actual story. But obviously, there's a lot more going on here. So let's talk about the fundamentals of what the story's trying to do with its presentation. So this great contraption, you can only assume a few things, but because of the way the world is depicted, that there's 2 sides. Either someone is trying to stop the great contraption because, maybe they're wanting to become the new clockworker and maybe control the power of the world. And, you think about it, if you control the power source of the world, you're able to really obtain a lot of power. A lot of people might respect you, or a lot of people might, bow down before you if you control their very way of life, if you were to shut off the power or make the power stronger, whatever. So you can imagine someone wanting to become the clockworker. However, we see a different angle throughout the entire chapters, like the first 3 to 4 chapters, that nobody really cares or likes the clockworker. For instance, if something malfunctions, if something's going wrong, which that's where the story starts, everybody turns against her. Nobody likes her, and everybody's trying to form an angry mob and go after her. We see this. And so, being a clockworker, if, things aren't working right, they're gonna hate you, and something's going on. And so because of that reason, there is a lot of baggage with that title. So if someone wants to become the Clockworker, maybe steal her job, it makes you wonder, why would you want to deal with that overall burden? Now, as I said, there's different angles to look at this, depending on where the storytelling and where the writer wants to take it. For instance, it can be a story about maybe the Great Contraption is somehow a bad thing. Like, for all we know, maybe the entirety of the world, the Great Contraption is sapping the life out of the planet itself. Maybe something like a Final Fantasy VII situation, to where the very actual contraption that is powering everything is just killing the planet. That is a possibility. That is a direction the story could be taking with why someone would want to break it down or stop it, etc., is because of that reason. Or, like I said, it can be them wanting to obtain power and be very strong and just have a lot of status. That's another way to look at it. Now, there is something that does need to be mentioned, and the fact is, from the early looks of the story, it seems like to be a Clockworker, it's through nepotism. That's what it seems like to me, and FYI, if you don't know what nepotism is, it's passed along through family status, for instance, one family member to the next. And so, because of that, it makes you wonder, why is our main female character, the Clockworker, why is she been forced to this role? Why is that family forced to do that role? Is it a curse? Is it some form of curse? And what is a Soulwinder? So that's something that needs to be talked about, because I've talked a lot about, the Great Contraption and all of that, but what is a Soulwinder? Well, let's think about this. When you wind something up, like a music box, etc., you're powering it. You're winding up that contraption. And when I think of a Soulwinder, what the name actually represents, it makes me think of maybe someone winding up the very soul itself and giving it power. And maybe that's what's happening to the Great Contraption. Maybe, decades, centuries ago or whatever, it was powered up and it was winded up, and eventually, that winding up gear is going to slow down and stop, and someone's going to have to step in and wind it back up again. And maybe that's what needs to be done, and maybe that's what a Soulwinder is supposed to be. Their role in the world is to wind up the Great Contraption and allow it to keep going. But the question is Nathan a part of that? Does he know he might be potentially capable of that? Or is that not even something that's going to happen? Who really knows? But regardless, he's dead, at least from what we know so far. And let's give a little bit more context to what a Soulwinder is. So from what we found out, is that a Soulwinder can basically, they're a god. They're able to bring anyone's desires to, manifestation. They can manifest any desire, etc. So you kind of view a Soulwinder as a god. And so if my theory is correct that maybe the Great Contraption is like sapping the life out of the planet, etc. Maybe the planet has a soul, and the Soulwinder is literally winding up the soul of the planet to allow it to continue to function. That's my personal theory at this point in the story. Now, why would someone want to kill, Nathan? Who killed him, etc.? Well, we get a few hints at potentially who did it. I mean, we have, in the early stages of chapter 2 and 3, we get to see Nathan meet someone, and he recognizes someone that's at the door. And we know that someone met him, and someone killed him in his house. And we get to see the person in chapter 3 and 4, which is called Julia. I believe that's how you pronounce her name. And she appears to be the one that, assassinated him. Now, we don't know if she necessarily did, because we didn't actually get to see the panels of her really committing the act. She doesn't try to say she did or didn't. I mean, she implies more she did it, but once again, things can be very misleading because the story is more of a murder mystery, at least at this point, of why or how it happened and who is the person, etc. That is, what appears in your mind. So if Nathan so-called knew this person that, killed him, assassinated him, even if it isn't, let's say, Julia or whatever, why? Was that person that met him early in the day the same person that killed him? Someone different? But obviously, there's many things. For all we know, if Nathan is necessarily a god, like a Soulwinder, it's possible that he could still be alive. I mean, we don't really know, because, I mean, the soul part of the whole thing is yet to really play a purpose. Winder could be applied to gears being wounded up, so we don't really know. So for all we know, he could be alive, he could be dead. We know golems are a thing in this series, we get to see it, so for all we know, maybe he's a golem. I'm just saying. So, overall, is it a good story? So far, yes. I think it's really good, and if there is something that does need to be mentioned that I haven't actually mentioned, I neglected, actually, I should have talked about it already, is the fact that if you were to read the chapters, let's say, on Webtoon, at least I read mine on, mobile, I know if you read it on mobile, there is music, like a soundtrack that plays while you're reading a chapter, and FYI, if you're unaware of this, sometimes on Webtoon, when a chapter comes out, there is music applied to that said chapter. And so far, every single chapter that has come out for Soulwinder has had music attached to it. And I think it's absolutely fantastic because it really sets a tone and presentation of kind of how you should feel about certain given moments. It really adds an air, like an atmosphere. And I think that, the people or the person that is writing Soulwinder is doing a good job with it. And I just wanted to give it a shout out. It's a relatively new series, a small series right now, but I feel like it would interest a lot of you if you're looking for something to read, since obviously a lot of different stories are on hiatus or have, ended recently. Because of that, some of you might be looking for something to check out, and I personally recommend Soulwinder. So if you are interested in reading it, by the way, I'll have the link to it in the description. You can click on it, and it'll take you to the chapter, the first chapter, whatever. I highly recommend it. It's good, and, be completely transparent. If you click on the link, it does help me out a lot. I'm going to be honest there. But, yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much for watching. I love you all. Be safe. Stay healthy. If you enjoyed the video, leave me a like. It helps me out a lot. With that, guys, Chibi out.